Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Christensen and this is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, celebrating classic horror throughout history with new episodes every Friday night. A landmark horror film, 1945's Dead of Night, was produced by Britain's famed Ealing Studios and directed by a group of mostly younger upstarts, including Charles Crichton, Basil Dearden, and Robert Hamer, with veterans Alberto Cavalcanti and producer Michael Balcon marshaling their forces. Widely regarded as one of the earliest and most influential examples of a horror anthology, the film presents a quintet of charming and creepy stories, all linked by a central framing narrative. An architect visits a country home only to realize that he has seen the place and its guests before in a recurring dream. When he reveals this knowledge, each guest recounts a spooky or supernatural story involving hearses, mirrors, Christmas parties, ventriloquist dummies, and golfers. Combining original stories and adaptations of existing works, Dead of Night masterfully weaves a lighthearted approach to macabre subject matter, and its innovative structure and eerie tone has had a lasting influence on horror films and TV series, including The Twilight Zone and Tales from the Crypt. Lock your doors, pour yourself a cup of tea, and enjoy some bite-sized nightmares as we celebrate the 80th anniversary of Dead of Night. Who's up for a few British ghost stories? We're going to be talking about the 1945 anthology film Dead of Night, celebrating its 80th anniversary, and we have an incredible panel to chat about it with me. Let's bring everybody in. Let's say hello to Lee Price.
Thanks for the invitation. I just have this strange feeling that I've been here before.
John McDevitt.
Super excited to be here.
Katie Glidewell, aka the blonde in front.
I'm not frightened. I'm very excited to talk about this anthology.
Alan Trump.
Hello, everybody. Glad to be here.
And rounding out the crew, Christiana Benedict.
Hello.
And we'll be chatting about Dead of Night, 1945, celebrating its 80th anniversary. And yes, we will be talking spoilers. So if you haven't seen this 80-year-old film, I understand, because it's 80 years old. And who watches 80-year-old films anymore? Thanks for coming on the show, buddy. Everyone raised their hands. I'm so happy. I'm in the right room. Thanks for coming on the show, everybody, and welcome. I'm going to start off with you, Christiane, because you contributed the essay for the 2007 anthology of essays about classic horror films, Horror 101. And you talked about Dead of Night. What made you choose that film to write about for us?
As I recall, somebody dropped out and you assigned it to me.
That's a terrible story. Come on with something better.
Well, I mean, it was on my wish list. So, I mean, it's not as if it was just out of the blue that you asked me to do it. But no, I mean, it's a film that I love. I mean, and it's Ealing Studios doing horror. The only time they did it.
And how did you come to the movie for the first time? Do you remember?
Yes, I saw it on a fly-by-night UHF channel out of Denver when I was 14, I think. And it was the abridged version that was released in American cinemas when it was originally released. I don't have any idea of how that station got a hold of that print, but whatever. And it omitted the Christmas story and the golf story. So I was one of those audience members that was very confused by, the appearance of those characters in the big montage at the end, stalking the video store.
Alan, how about you? Where did you come to the movie for the first time?
I had only seen stills until I went to some convention like a Flashback Weekend or Monster Bash or Horror Hound thing and picked up the Blu-ray of it. So that's the first opportunity I had to see it, and I'm sorry I hadn't seen it before, considering what an influential film is. But, that's been the case with several things. Like I never saw The Old Dark House until that was issued on Blu-ray. So
everybody's on their own journey. Katie, how about you?
I actually saw it at the Massacre in Chicago in 2018, I think. And I actually walked in 20 minutes late. I was just mesmerized as soon as I walked in. Loved it. Have been raving about it ever since. Bought the Blu-ray. And then I love the fact that after I watched it, someone gave me the VHS of Magic, which I'm like, yes, and I believe I saw the influence of this. So there you go.
Yep. John, how about you?
I remember hearing about it after my entry point to anthology cinema, which was the 1972 Tales from the Crypt movie, and then kind of heard about Dead of Night as an influence on the Amicus anthologies. I think I also remember hearing that the Dummy, the episode of the Twilight Zone, could have been influenced by Dead of Night. And, you know, the Twilight Zone and Tales from the Crypt and anthologies in general are things that I grew to love very quickly and very deeply. And then eventually saw Dead of Night and just fell in love with it.
And Lee, I had the great pleasure of reading an article you recently wrote for Wonders in the Dark, which I will include the link for below because everybody should have that same pleasure. How did you come to the movie for the first time? And then tell us a little bit about some of your research for your recent article.
Well, I saw Dead of Night for the first time when I was too young to have been watching it. I'm probably the only person here who was genuinely terrified by Dead of Night on the first viewing. I was somewhere between 8 and 11. So this was, back in a time when horror movies weren't quite as graphic or as they are now. It's a different standard for the scare, I think. This would have been the late 1960s. The ventriloquist episode just knocked me for a loop. I still find it incredibly creepy. And actually, I find the whole thing, it's got a pleasant, mild scare vibe going through the whole thing. Recently, I decided when I was doing some prep for this that I'd like to write a piece about it because I've never written about Dead of Night. I've written about a number of different movies and decided to do a really deep dive into it. So that's 50 clinical observations of Dead of Night. It was fun because I went into the movie with a big notepad, filled up 25 pages of notes, and it is amazing how well the movie works, how well the movie is structured. It is very intelligently done, where all the episodes are connecting together in various ways with their themes. So writing it really increased my appreciation for a movie that I've loved for a good more than 50 years now.
Yeah, I got to say, I had my meager handful of notes, and as I was reading your article, I'm just like, well, never mind. I'll just let Lee run the show here. It really is a terrific write-up. I recommend everybody check it out. John, you alluded to anthology horror, and we recently, several of you were on the Oni Baba panel, where we talked about kind of the pleasures of smaller horror stories. And this one clocks in, I want to say, just about 100 minutes, and we get 5 stories plus the wraparound. What is it that you particularly love about that short horror format?
First and foremost, it has to be the novelty and the excitement of having multiple stories in one film. It feels like, in this case, a 5-fer or a 6-fer, because you're getting these 5 stories plus the wraparound story all in one film. And there's just something exciting about having more than just one story in a single film. And also it's more low stakes, I think, because each story is such a small investment of your time. We're kind of more generous as viewers to stories that don't kind of overstay their welcome, that don't kind of take up too much of a runtime. Ever since the Tales from the Crypt 1972 film, as I said, watching that for the first time, after seeing it on HBO, a few years after discovering the HBO television series Tales from the Crypt, I've just been obsessed with anthologies.
Anybody else? Some anthology thoughts?
Well, one thing I would say is it's kind of like opening up a Whitman sampler, and you've got all these different treats to try. If you don't like one, check the next one. But like the Beatles said, you got to have all your teeth pulled out after the Savoy truffle. So you've got a really nice, variety of things. One thing that I think, anthology films must be made for the people who put together cinematic trailers, because I think, for instance, of Dr. Terror's House of Horrors prior to Tales from the Crypts is, you've got footage of, here's a killer plant, here's a werewolf, here's a vampire, here's all these things, just to lure you in with an incredible melange of supernatural creatures to come get you.
I'm not really an aficionado of the anthology format. I just happen to love Qui-Gon and Dead of Night. They are great movies. Generally, I prefer to settle in for the full course meal of a feature film that goes 90 minutes or longer.
What do you think makes Dead of Night special then?
It's that connecting narrative does a beautiful job of bringing all the stories to a natural climax. The whole setting where people are interacting so wittily. It's a very witty setting, and it's charming up to a point, very nicely captured as the ominous atmosphere grows steadily through the whole movie. It works for me as a whole. I think it's a full movie experience, which I don't usually feel that way about an anthology movie. And I will also say the worst of the episodes here, when I started thinking about other anthology movies I've seen, except for Qui-Gon, that's a huge difference there. But the worst of these stories is much better than the worst of any of the other anthology movies that I've seen.
Well, and it's funny because Qui-Gon has like virtually no wraparound, and this one has, I think, one of the strongest wraparounds from any anthology film, where we really do keep returning to it, and it keeps feeding each of the stories. And as we'll talk about, I mean, it actually ends up feeding itself. This framing device becomes stronger by the end of the movie than it is while you're watching it during the film itself.
I mean, two of my favorite films are anthology films, Creepshow and Twilight Zone, the movie. And those are two that I grew up with that introduced me to horror, and, the little vignettes within that maybe they didn't necessarily all connect, other than with Twilight Zone, you had Burgess Meredith's narrative. I got hooked on anthology films because of those two. And when I was in like single digits. So telling stories around the campfire kind of thing that I've seen in different anthology films. And to me, that's kind of what these films are. It's like everyone tries to scare each other in like little ways rather than a full blown out thing. And you don't need to have the psychology of what the antagonist's like meaning is, and if they got beat when they were a child and that's why they're doing this to the, it's like, no, just get them nice and tight and scare me little bits and let's go.
That's actually a great thought. The idea that everyone's getting a turn around the campfire, right? So you are getting a chance to kind of trade off and see who's going to be the scariest story. That's a really great analogy. I hadn't thought of that before.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like that sense of community of people telling each other stories. And you just kind of gave me a flashback to growing up with the Nickelodeon series, Are You Afraid of the Dark? And feeling like I was a member of the Midnight Society and how important that was to me.
Well, I mean, I grew up reading anthologies. I mean, I read a lot of short stories. One of the things that isn't discussed much these days, but was a sort of a thing in the early 70s, is the rise of the horror novel. Because before, I don't know, The Exorcist or Rosemary's Baby, horror really didn't exist at novel length. I mean, you look at the great horror stories of the mid-century, like Haunting of Hill House or The Shrinking Man or I Am Legend. They're novellas. They're not very long. And that is how horror mainly existed as a literary genre for a long time. There are exceptions, of course, like Dracula. I think that this film and other anthologies sort of capture that sort of literary zeitgeist. And it's significant that a lot of the anthologies that we think of, particularly the Amicus anthologies, were written by the guys that were writing that short fiction in mid-century. You got Robert Bloch and Richard Matheson and Charles Beaumont. But this film goes to older sources. You have E.F. Benson and H.G. Wells, and it's sort of before the modern genre. So it's sort of lends this film a sort of a quaintness that other anthology films lack. And I agree with Lee. The framing sequence is first rate. It's the only anthology film that I can think of where the framing sequence is the essential part of the film. Most anthology films like Dr. Terror's House of Horrors or Asylum or The House That Dripped Blood. I mean, the framing sequence is really, filler.
Pretty slim, just kind of basically, get people into a room so that they can all trade stories. It's funny, when you were talking about the literary sources, those Alfred Hitchcock collections of short stories, those were kind of similar to what we're talking about here, where you got to just get in, get a story, and then get out. It wasn't, as you said, Katie, it wasn't a lot about character. And I'm somebody that I like movies versus TV shows because I like stories. I like to hear the story in its, most essential form. I'm not interested necessarily in hanging out with characters for episode after episode, season after season, which is why I really like, the only TV shows I really enjoyed was The Twilight Zone, because it was, here's a story. Think on that for a while. We'll be back next week.
Yeah, I mean, one of the creators of the modern genre, Stephen King, says that a short story is a kiss and a novel is a love affair. So.
What does that say about me?
Aaron, one other thing I would like to mention, kind of building on what Christiane was saying. For some reason, I've been getting into this lately. I don't know why, but around 1930 and sometimes even before that, over in England, they had all of these anthologies that were incredibly popular, called Lady Cynthia Asquith put out the Ghost Book, and then there was a second Ghost Book, and then there was another, a lady named Christine Campbell Thompson who put out something called Not at Night, and then there were dozens of sequels to these. So the English people were, some of these stories go all the way back to, like Poe, and they'd take things from the Castle of Otranto, and they would take, stories from J. Sheridan Le Fanu and things from Shakespeare and H. Russell Wakefield and Arthur Machen, and put them all together in these huge anthologies. So I think the appetite was over there kind of, for this sort of presentation of a bunch of little stories all put together.
That's a great observation. And, Christiane, you point out in your essay in Horror 101 that, horror films basically didn't get released in Britain during the war. Basically like throughout the early part of the 40s, we just didn't see any horror films in Britain.
Well, there's a reason for that.
Tell us.
I mean, in the piece that I wrote for Horror 101, I said that there were no horror movies shown on the island of Great Britain, which is not actually true. It was greatly discouraged, though. What happened was in 1939, the British Board of Film Censorship was reassigned to the Ministry of Information because of the impending war. And they strongly disapproved of the genre, but they didn't outlaw it. They, in fact, created a certificate specifically for horror movies. It was an H certificate. And as far as I know, the only film that was actually shown during this period with an H certificate was The Bride of Frankenstein, which had a very small run in 1939, 1940. Once the war ended, I mean, it wasn't quite as imperative to stifle the genre. But even so, I mean, even before then, there aren't really a lot of British horror films. There are like the Todd Slaughter films, which I would argue aren't necessarily even horror films. They're horror adjacent melodramas. I mean, one of his films is based on, The Woman in White, and then there's one of them is a science fiction film, and then I think the only one that I would even think about putting in the genre is Sweeney Todd. But and then I guess there's The Ghoul with Karloff, and other than that, there's not really a lot. I mean, British horror films are not really a thing until the 1950s.
The feel of this film is kind of lighthearted, and they're talking about really, kind of like dark subject matter. And I think that is kind of key to its success. I think it also is indicative of where it was produced.
Well, I mean, this isn't actually unique to Great Britain. Ghost stories in the 1930s and 1940s did not tend to be horror movies. You had things like Topper and The Canterville Ghost and The Ghost and Mrs. Muir and the Abbott and Costello film, The Time of Their Lives. You don't really see ghost stories as horror movies until right after the war with this film, with The Uninvited.
Right.
And then you start to see, the infiltration of all of those ghost stories from English literature that you're talking about in the first part of the century and late Victorian era start to trickle into the genre.
And Lee, I'm going to throw the ball to you. This film is based on both existing pieces of literature, as we mentioned, H.G. Wells and E.F. Benson. But we also have some new pieces that are written specifically for this film itself, from John Baines and Angus MacPhail. Would you mind doing like a little layout of our stories?
Let's see if I remember. Hearse Driver is E.F. Benson. The Golfing Story is H.G. Wells. Ventriloquist Story, I think, is attributed to John Baines, but it's been fairly well established that there is a story that exists, that it was almost certainly the source for it, probably because Ealing didn't own it or wasn't going to purchase it. They just decided to attribute it to one of the writers they had there anyway. So I think that's how that one got by. I'm not so sure about how the Christmas Story worked. I think that one's attributed to John Baines. Is that one?
That's Angus MacPhail.
Oh, is that Angus MacPhail? I mean, that's a fascinating story. I think we have to really look at what's going on with that one. Angus MacPhail is a character who I really attempted to do the research on to find out how deeply involved he was with this, how much he was a real central piece of the people of the group who made this. I think he was. I have a hunch that he was a very critical part of the whole thing with his friendship with Alfred Hitchcock. I found this one really cryptic quote saying that he had a long-standing interest in demonology. And I am dying to find out more about that, where that comes from. But I couldn't find anything to bet any other confirmation of that. And so that did not go into the piece I wrote. But I was hoping to toss it out to this group, especially if there are any signs of occult knowledge going on here that goes beyond simple ghost story, or is there more going on here than that? Where Walter Craig, the architect, who's having the nightmare, he's in the middle of a circle that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 angles coming out of it. Is that something? I wish I could put the pieces together. I don't know. If anybody gets a whiff of the occult in here that seems to be from somebody who might know what they're talking about, I would be very curious about what those things are.
And we also, in addition to having, the source material from different folks, we also have different directors for each of these pieces. And I think one of the magic tricks of this movie is that it feels like a cohesive whole. It doesn't feel like, oh, this is a completely different view. This is a completely different style. It all feels like one of a piece.
That's one of the things that I loved about the film, and just really blew me away when seeing it for the first time. That for something that was made in 1945, how honestly it stands up today. Like the cinematography, the production design, and especially like the score and music, especially the one with the mirror. Like that one, just rewatching it before this, it's like that one I definitely had to have been an influence on films after that, because it's just so moving and just so like it just really makes a statement when the character looks in the mirror and sees the fire blazing and is losing his mind. And it's like it really struck me like, damn, this is 1945, and I swear to God, like there's like 20-30 years down the line, you're still going to be hearing this music. One of the things that and Lee, I'm sure you found this out, like the one with the Christmas party and Sally, is that's actually with Frances Kent and Constance Kent, based on a murder that actually did happen. And then when I was doing the stuff on IMDb, the fact that the little boy who plays Francis Kent was uncredited, and then no one found him after that. And it's like, I'm looking at the little boy who plays Francis Kent was uncredited and apparently has never been identified. I'm like, what the hell is that?
It's
Like,
got to be the ghost of Francis Kent.
I
It
know.
has to
Is this
be.
the ghost of Francis Kent? And I really wish that they would start saying darling more after, like, you know, watching this a couple times, because especially with Sally and Francis, like, I wish you were my sister. Oh, you sweet darling. And I'm like, gosh, I love them. Like, this dialogue, man, they just need to bring this back.
So our 4 directors are Alberto Cavalcanti, Basil Dearden, Charles Crichton, and Robert Hamer. And as I mentioned, they do really all bring a cohesive feel to it. It's not like, say, the VHS stories where it really does feel like they are farmed out, they come back, and there's a real disparity between the artistic views. And one of the things I used to say about, you know, like the Amicus films, what I think I liked was that it felt like there was a single vision telling all of these different stories, different subject matters. Like you said, Alan, you know, we have all these different creatures, but it all feels like it's being told from the same storyteller. And here we have different directors, but it does still feel like it's a cohesive whole. And I'm not sure what the alchemy was on that one.
Very different than something like Spirits of the Dead, where you've got Roger Vadim doing something, and then you got Federico Fellini doing another one, which are wildly different styles.
I remember on the first viewing of Dead of Night, I did think the odd story out was the golfer's story.
Sure.
But revisiting it a few times since that first viewing, it does feel more cohesive with the rest of the film than it did on that first viewing. And I think it's because there is a thread of humor that carries through the entire film, and it's more amplified in the golfer's story. But it continues a humorous thread that we see through the entire film pretty much. I mean, the film, I would say, really only loses its humor, and I would say it's truly horrifying finale, where it just kind of descends into this, you know, nightmare of madness. But it is a remarkably cohesive film. And I would also say that the golfer's story is to Dead of Night what The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill is to Creepshow, to reference the film Katie said she loves as well.
Love it.
I actually like the golfer's story now, because I remember hearing, you know, prior to seeing the film that, you know, the golfer story is the one, you know, the outlier. And I actually enjoy it quite a bit now, because I think it does have that same kind of upper class British approach to being scared, in that, you know, we have somebody who literally walks into a lake and drowns themselves. You know, like, I feel like that's kind of the overriding flavor of this movie, is that there's some horrifying things happening, you know, sisters killing their brothers, and, you know, all the passengers in the trolley car getting murdered, you know,
Yeah.
But it's all like, yes, but at least, you know, our race car driver, he was saved, so it's okay. There's just kind of a lighthearted tone to it all, until, you know, things get, like you said, things get dark for the ventriloquist story, and then go darker still.
I mean, Ealing was not a auteur type studio. There have been some arguments made for, you know, Alexander McKendrick and like that, for that they were auteurs, but it was very writing based, and it was very much Michael Balcon, the producer, the head of the studio, sitting down a bunch of really talented people around a table. And in this case, a lot of them were pretty young and up and coming people who wanted to prove themselves, and let them brainstorm. And it happened to be that a number of these were friends, and a good deal of them were people who were not only working around that table, but would then go across the street and drink at the Red Lion pub and continue to work on it while they were over there. Some pretty heavy drinkers, but also some good storytellers, some really good storytellers in that mix. So I think you're getting elements of different people showing up all the time in different episodes, so that when you have the golfer walking into the water, now, you know, there was an additional writer on that too, T.B. Clark, who was adding dialogue. because the Angus MacPhail and John Baines were not comic writers for the most part.
I was wondering if he was connected to the Radford and Wayne comedy team. I wondered if maybe like he was somebody who was associated with them and knew how to write to their strengths.
Offhand, I don't think so.
Yeah,
He did
okay.
write for them again in Passport to Pimlico. I don't think he wrote for them previous to that. I could be wrong. When you have a golfer comically committing suicide by walking into the water like that, is that not Kind Hearts and Coronets material? This is Robert Hamer stuff, who would have been over at the Red Lion pub drinking with the rest of them. Right. So I think there was a lot of back and forth. I like to imagine that there was a lot of input from people who are not down as screenwriters on this. And there's this the very beginning of the Ventriloquist Story just kind of fascinates me for the way it's handled, because Basil Dearden shot goes directly into the Cavalcanti shot of that opens the Ventriloquist Story. They knew what they were doing. They were in touch with each other. These were directors who were friends and talking to each other all the time. So
well, and to make each other look good, to make that kind of handoff seamless, to say, hey, I'm going to do this so that you can pick right up and bounce off of that. I'd love to just kind of like talk about the stories themselves. We do start off with our architect, coming to the country home, and he realizes that he's seen all these people before, and he kind of knows what's going to happen because he's been having this recurring dream. And then we go into them bringing uncanny stories of their own into the mix. And the first is our race car driver, Hugh Granger, who talks about his story of the hearse.
It was interesting for being the story with the shortest run time, and makes such effective use of that very short run time. I mean, it's just such a tightly scripted segment. That's just so impactful. And the twist might even surprise some viewers who are watching the film today. I mean, they might not expect that it's a bus full of people that are going to die instead of the main character.
When I think Rod Serling adapted this for Twilight Zone, it's an elevator in that story though, right?
Doesn't it have a plane crash in it too? Doesn't that one? I remember that has the actress Arlene Martell, who was in everything. She was in, she played Spock's wife T'Pring on Star Trek, and she was on Hogan's Heroes and things. She played this sort of beautiful, kind of diabolical woman who foretold death, saying that there's room for one more. I enjoyed it. Like I said, I the first time I saw it, I immediately thought of that Twilight Zone, episode, because that's the first I'd seen that years and years before, and was more familiar with it. I did like it. The one thing I think is interesting is, I think from what I've read, the actor who played the hearse driver was known to be kind of a comedy actor, and he has some of that. And they said, and in reading the reviews in Rigby's English Gothic book about it, they said that even at the very end, he shows up, like we said, with all of these different characters at the end to kind of torment our hero. And he's like, room for one more. So he gets a note of the sinister in there. So I enjoyed it.
Yeah, Miles Malleson, who would show up in a bunch of Hammer films as well.
I like that one. I thought it was very interesting when it went from 10 to 4 and then 4 to 10. And then I was thinking it did it again, because I was like, oh, it went 666 with the different, like, in the amount of hours that it went. But also when he's going to get on the bus, and then it's like, we only had room for one more. And then when he sees his reaction when it goes over, he's just like, I was like, well, buddy, you just saw a bus full of people die,
they're British,
plummet to their death. Yeah. Like, I realize you just survived the war, so I mean, your senses are a little bit, but could have given a little bit more regarding what just happened. And also the sexual harassment that, they end up getting married, so I guess it worked out. But it was, again, the darling, she's like, don't try that with me. But that was, I think it's a great way, to start it out, to know. And it's nice that he's actually trying to give the architect, it's like, look, I've had some crazy dreams. Here's my story. And it's like, I like how they're all trying to go around. It's like, look, Mr. Architect, who's a brand new person in this house, complete stranger. You're saying some crazy stuff to us. You know what? Some crazy stuff has happened to each of us, and now we're going to tell you guys why. Right. It's very nice and forgiving.
They want to make him feel welcome. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Which I'm like, well, good for you guys.
I mean, I just saw the new Final Destination film, so it's on my mind. I mean, it's short and sweet, and it hits you like a staple to the forehead. It's awesome.
Love the soundtrack with the use of sound when the whole "is it a dream or is it not" scene starts to take place. It doesn't seem to be a dream. He never falls asleep. We see that he actually kind of gets up and this is happening in real time, but it does seem to have complete dream logic to it going on as well. But the use of the soundtrack with the song that fades. And by the way, if you, I'll get back to the song in a minute. The use of songs in the movie is absolutely fascinating because I was watching the movie. I'm not getting back to it in a minute because I'm just going ahead with it now.
Excellent.
Okay. I've started watching British movies with subtitles so I don't miss a thing. And they very happily translated the songs and the lyrics. When it fades out there, the song that's playing on the radio, it's about something about olden days, I think, at that point. And thinking back about olden days, and then it fades out and goes directly into the time slip. And that happens with each of the songs that's used in the movie, the Hullabaloo or whatever that's sung during the ventriloquist song. And there's one other song in it as well. And the lyrics are used extremely intelligently for actually referring to something that's about to happen. Something to watch for. Watch it with the subtitles and you really get it quite clearly.
And I think you're right, listening with an ear for the music, because the music is quite wonderful, and you write about Oryx's touches throughout the film.
And this is one area where it's so effective because it's not using the music. It's ambient music here that fades out and goes to the movie playing with total silence. The ticking of the clock stops next, so that we're just in complete silence, which is very eerie in a movie theater. And then, going to the window, when he opens the curtains, you just hear some chirping. It's all ambient sound, no Oryx score behind it. Beautifully done. And they do that several times in the movie. The ventriloquist episode just has a couple of instances of Oryx music for the most part. Once again, just ambient sound to the whole thing, beautifully handled. Sound technicians don't usually get enough credit on these movies. Ealing had some good craftsmen working there.
It reminds me just a little bit of I Know Where I'm Going, the Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger movie, because in that film, every time the heroine goes through a door or a portal or something, she winds up further into sort of an enchanted story. This film uses that convention too, in at least the first three stories, in which the characters are either go through a portal or are looking through a portal of some variety. In her story, it is the window, because it's dark when he opens the window, but it's not as dark outside when it should be. Then you got the magic mirror, and then the girl in the Christmas Story. Since we're coming back to the Christmas Story, her encounter with the uncanny when she goes through a door in the attic that nobody has any anticipation is actually there. She moves into sort of a liminal space when she enters into the little boy's room.
The architecture of that house is so confounding. In one moment, I wondered if she actually was between walls because one of the hallways was so dilapidated.
Yeah.
And it's just such a strange journey. It also reminded me a little bit of Argento films and just the strange liminal spaces that you find in his films sometimes.
I don't know how English children played hide and seek, but I really don't understand how none of those kids found Sally when she was screaming with Johnny before she went and found the ghost kid, because it's like you guys are not very good hide and seek players.
We did play sardines when we were kids, so I can very much relate. I thought it was very charming, and the stiff upper lip, attitude of even the children and the party, and when the young man does make a pass at her, oh no, none of that. That rule breaks the rules of sardines, And Jonathan Ridley's books points out that she rejects the one guy, but she adopts the small child, the affection of the small child, and is very matronly and sings a lullaby to the child. And we were talking before about these old horror collections like M.R. James and Arthur Machen and all these other folks. That idea of a dead child somewhere in the house, is a pretty common trope that you see a lot there.
And also with M.R. James, the tradition of a ghost story for Christmas.
Mm-hmm. We do see some not necessarily polite behavior of our men toward women basically throughout the entire movie. Nobody seems to really understand the notion of consent. Let's just lay all of that blame right here at the doorstep of Dead Night. I think that's where all of our problems started right here with this movie.
Well, I think Sally Ann Howes shows pretty clearly how to handle those situations.
How to set boundaries. Yes, absolutely.
It's a charming performance. I really enjoy her in this film, both in the linking narrative and also when she gets her place to shine. But I love the flirtation scenes. It's a real back and forth because she is mildly interested in him. And then he moves a little bit and she pushes him away, and beautifully done. Very well written too.
And I do love that moment at the climax of that story that Katie referenced in her intro, of just saying that she's not afraid and saying it repeatedly. And it feels so human, and it might seem like an over-the-top choice, that dialogue and the way that it's delivered. You just kind of glimpse a little bit of madness in her character upon the realization of what she just experienced. And that's something you see in many of the segments in this film.
Well, and it kind of just breezes through the idea that the little girl actually strangled her brother and then nearly cut his head off. Like you, Lee, I'm getting older and I like to watch with subtitles now so I don't miss anything. And I was like, did he just say that like they near cut his head off? Wow. This is just a lighthearted little horror film.
Interesting thing about Constance Kent, she almost lived long enough to see this film. She died a few months before it was released at the age of 100. She only served 20 years for murdering her brother.
Oh my God.
Wow. Heading into The Haunted Mirror. This is actually one of my favorites. I love the mood that it presents. And as you were saying, he definitely thinks he's losing his mind. And I think, similar to the ventriloquist story, it is that question of, is this in his mind? Is this supernatural? And I don't think the story necessarily needs to answer that for you. I think it could go either way. And I really enjoyed that. People's thoughts on The Haunted Mirror.
I'd like to say that I love the fact that there's an actress whose name is Googie.
Yes.
And
Googie Withers.
When she's going through everything, with the mirror, and she's like holding it together and stuff like that. And her husband, it's like her beau and fiance and then husband, and he just like is losing it more and more and more. And when she's finally got the kind of the answer of where it's like, oh, here's the mirror that I gave you. Yeah, by the way, the last person killed his fiance and all that stuff. Maybe I should have mentioned that when you bought it. I don't know. Sorry, Toots. And then when she goes home and he's like, oh, now you're back. And she's like, what are you talking about? Like, where did I just walk into? And I'm like, good for you, girl. Like, She was awesome. I loved her throughout the film. But it's, to me, the mirror story had, again, that music and score that just like hit me, like core moment in the entire film, and just like gradually just got more and more intense and like so very dramatic. And she was like, screw this. And I guess that was only one take. They only had one mirror they could break. That was it. So good for you, Googie.
I love the concept of it because it is just kind of one of those true horror ideas. The idea that you look into a mirror and you don't see the room that you're standing in, you see something else. I think there's something really great about that. And it's almost like you don't need to have a story beyond that. Something evil doesn't have to happen. Just knowing that there's a mirror out there that doesn't truly reflect what it's supposed to be reflecting.
There's another really good interpretation of this kind of theme, and if you've ever seen From Beyond the Grave that they made of the R. Chetwynd Hayes collection of stories, where there's a sinister mirror that they take the paint off, and it's another young couple, and and after a time the malevolent figure that lives in the mirror world tries to drag the hero into his world and replenish himself.
Well worth checking out as well. One of those great Amicus anthologies.
Have you ever put bits of tape on your mirrors to prevent yourself from accidentally walking into another dimension? Because I have. The thing that strikes me about this every time I see it is what a good actress Googie Withers is. Because I've seen her in other films. The one that really stands out to me, other than this one, is Night in the City. And she plays a completely different type of character in that, and she's completely convincing in that film as she is in this. And this is a terrific performance. I mean, she's kind of chameleonic. I love the mirror. I love the way that it's edited at the end, where she's struggling with her husband before she breaks the mirror. And I like the idea, of looking into the past through a glass darkly.
I really adore this segment as well, and I don't know the name of the actor who plays the husband, but I think his performance is one of the most excellent in the film as well. Just the subtlety of his descent into madness, it's palpable, like just his anxiety through that experience.
For a movie that's as funny as this, this does bring out the theme of evil that does go through it. There does seem to be, especially in the Walter Craig linking narrative story, he talks about how he feels he's going to succumb to urges to do something unspeakably evil. And that line is echoed in the Haunted Mirror episode by a line that Peter says about how he feels that he is becoming touched by something very evil. That really hasn't come into the movie until this point, with this story and then with Ventriloquist Story and then the conclusion of the linking narrative. There really is a theme of genuine evil in the world. It starts to move ahead. I wanted to mention one other thing, and that's about the George score. I can't get it out of my head. I associate him so much with Cocteau movies, and all the Cocteau movies that I associate him with have haunted mirrors in them. So it just makes sense to me that he lets completely loose with his full orchestral splendor in the Haunted Mirror episode of this movie, where he's, no longer in France, no longer with Cocteau, and he gets to do another mirror story, and he really has fun with it. But you go through the Cocteau stories, and he scores the Cocteau movies, Blood of a Poet and Beauty and the Beast and Orpheus. There are those mirrors in every single one of them with Oric doing the scores. He's the master of the mirror as far as far as composers go.
Walter is framed in mirrors sometimes in the framing sequence, which sort of makes the mirror segment of the film all of a piece with the framing segment, which is, I love the unity of the film's vision that way.
And then we go to our most divisive of the stories, which is the golfing story. Again, it's from H.G. Wells and from his short story, The Inexperienced Ghost. That's where the comedy comes from, is that we not only do we have these two friends who are friends to the end until a woman comes along, and then they decide to play a round of golf for her hand, and the other has to remove himself from the situation and this mortal coil. Wait, couldn't you just leave and not pursue her any further? But he decides to walk himself into a lake, comes back as a ghost, and then has to haunt his friend. He doesn't know how to dematerialize after his friend says that he'll give up the girl if he'll just leave him alone. I think there's a lot of really great comedy. We've talked about Basil Rathford and Naughton Wayne, but they were a comedy team, and I think you can see that kind of lived in byplay between the two of them. And I think they really do play well. And I think the service of this segment is to let us breathe, because we're about to head right into the Ventriloquist Story, which I think everybody knew was going to be the showstopper. Everything's done by design. I think they talked about it at the Red Lion and they went, this should be the order of these stories. We're going to go here, here, here. We're going to drop down and then we're going to send them out screaming.
It very much feels like a precursor to supernatural sitcoms like Bewitched or I Dream of Jeannie. And I'm thinking partly of just the hand gestures to dematerialize, and just those silly kind of sitcom-y gimmicks. It's charming, it's fun, and maybe it still feels just a little bit out of place in the movie, but I think it works well enough and it fits well enough to allow the film to remain a cohesive whole.
Well, and I think as Christiana mentioned, like we'd seen this kind of ghost story. This was what we were familiar with. I think there's a sense of kind of giving people a little taste of that.
I had an old paperback that had this story by H.G. Wells in it.
Oh, wow.
So I read it to see how different it was. And it is, for one thing, there's no romantic interest in it. There's no young lady, which I got to admit, the cinematic adaptation is more fun. It's basically like a club story, like Lord Dunsany used to write, where you sit around the, the National Geographic Society, smoking your cigars and having your brandy and telling you, I was in, Borneo once and I met a ghost. Instead of, there's nothing in it about the guy killing himself or anything like that. They are playing golf. The folks are playing golf, but it's about a guy at the club and he finds a ghost who doesn't. No, he's not very good at being a ghost. He's an inexperienced ghost, hence the name of the story. So, and he says, there's no horrible past to this place. What are you doing here? Are you a member of this club? The guy asks him. The ghost says, no, I'm not a member. I'm sorry. He says, look at the nice wood paneling. I thought this would be a good place to haunt. But what's most, and I won't say the end of the story. The end of the story is scarier than than this one. But in the story, the mystic hand jive that he does, because he can't remember how to dematerialize and go back to Ghost Grand Central Station or wherever. At one point, the guy says, I think I remember most of the guy, when he was talking to him, I learned most of it. And we went over it several times and practiced. Finally got it right and disappeared in the story. And the guy says, I think it went something like this.
Yeah.
And he says, but I'm doing something wrong. And this was very interesting, I thought. He said, one of the other patrons at the club says, I think I know what the right gesture to make is because I'm a Freemason. And did you ever see the Monty Python bit where they have the Mason special handshakes and stuff like that, where they do that? So there you get a little bit of that Society of the Golden Dawn, Freemason, secret occult stuff mixed in with that. But that just explained a little bit of me. But like I said, it's a lot funnier.
Now I have to read that story.
Mm-hmm. Real short story, yeah.
I'm just fascinated by the sexual politics of the story. Especially the last scene. It's acknowledged in the beginning that she has no favorite between them, but when she gets married and goes on her honeymoon, she wants a man. She just wants, and they have her. She says, "I'm tired. I'm going to bed." And she's going to be waiting there for him, and then it shows her in bed, and she is up, smiling, ready for someone to come through the door. And I don't think she really cares which one it is. And so the movie doesn't seem to. And I'm like, wait, this is 1945. Right. It's just when she's just married somebody and another man's going to walk in, and I think she's going to be pretty happy with it. The way it looks. So it's fun in a way. I love the last scene.
I also really love the role of the bartender. I mean, it's such a thankless role. And whoever that actor is does such a fantastic job with it and just enhances the scene and makes it even greater than it would have been otherwise. Just watching him get spooked was maybe the biggest riot of the whole movie.
It's kind of like Miles Mallison's completely stealing the hearse scene in just 10 seconds flat. And then the bartender does it in the golfing story.
This is one of those weird love triangle stories that I think would be solved for everyone if they would if they knew anything about polyamory.
I know, right?
I mean, it would just resolve itself.
They seem like they'd be okay.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a little bit about how the unfortunate loser in the situation, drowns himself in a lake. That's not a lake; it's a water trap.
Why is it that deep? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So, basically even the darkest part of the film or part of the story is linked to golf and is a joke. Which, I appreciate. I didn't used to appreciate the story, but I mean, every time I've seen the film since I saw the complete film, and I understand why the Americans cut this segment when it was released in the United States, it's improved. It's grown on me a lot. And I too have read the H.G. Wells story, and I think this is actually better. My suspicion about this, and I don't have any concrete evidence for this. This is just, a surmise, is that they wrote this story and they paid H.G. Wells because Wells was still alive and might have sued them for the similarities. I don't think it's a very similar story really at all.
And then let's move to our final segment, the ventriloquist, which, as Katie mentioned, we have seen echoes and echoes and echoes of this story down through. I mean, we have an episode of the Twilight Zone. We have magic. We have things, where ventriloquist dummies are just evil. So yeah, people's thoughts on ventriloquists.
Just as Katie is saying, that Magic with Anthony Hopkins is an extraordinary film. It's my favorite Anthony Hopkins performance by far. One of the most exquisite horror films I've ever seen. I love it so much. And it's just so heart-wrenching and devastating. And that's one of the reasons I love it.
Have you ever read the William Goldman novel?
Actually haven't, no.
It's really good as well. And I think it handles some issues better than the film even. Well worth checking out.
I adore the ventriloquist segment. And again, it's that descent into madness that we see in so many of the segments in this film. I think that performance of the ventriloquist is pretty extraordinary. Just watching him behave and just kind of express himself on his face in ways that are more and more unhinged. I mean, it is just a stunning performance.
Michael Redgrave was going through some stuff at the time, and it's been speculated that some of his personal problems at the time crept into his performance in this film. I mean, he is the big name in the cast, after all. The thing that strikes me every time I see this film is that it's psycho. You have the split personality, you have the integration of that personality at the end of the film, in which the sublimated evil personality has taken control, and poor Max is nowhere to be seen anymore. I mean, they only lack, the fly crawling on his hand at the end. Ventriloquist dolls are creepy. I mean, they call to mind the homunculi of alchemists and maybe the Frankenstein monster a little bit, or voodoo dolls. Dolls can be creepy, and they show up in not just ventriloquist stories. I mean, you want to make a haunted house atmospheric, have a nursery with a bunch of creepy dolls in it.
Yeah.
The thing that I really appreciate about this, though, is the way that it figures into the finale. This film absolutely makes the ventriloquist doll Hugo a live character inside the boundaries of the short segment. When they take the doll into the room with them to try to get him to react to the doll and try to cure him, and he starts fighting with the doll, they run into the room and try to save the doll like he's a real damn person. So all of the characters view him as a person. It's wonderful. And then you take that sort of animism into the final segment where you have, the series of visions that are sourced from the stories that have run throughout the film, and the doll gets up and walks.
Yeah.
And it's so creepy.
Yeah.
And Christian, I was just thinking as well, back to what you said earlier about portals in this film. I think the segment, the ventriloquist dummy, has some of those portals as well, specifically with the stage curtains that split between what's happening on stage for a live audience and what's happening backstage. And maybe this is less on point, but I was so struck by the set design of the ventriloquist cell. There's this enormous window kind of hanging over the set. In a particular shot where we're seeing the ventriloquist, this is at the end of the segment when he's just kind of practically in a coma, practically a vegetable, just laying in the bed before they bring in the other ventriloquist. Such a striking set. It kind of dwarfs all of the actors in the room, just seeing that enormous window hanging above them.
I have a question for everyone. The first 4 stories all have real supernatural elements. Dr. Van Straten in the linking narrative is going to deny they do, but nevertheless, what we see on the screen, we see real supernatural elements in all 4 stories. Is there a supernatural element in this story? Because Psycho directly comes from this. Psycho is psychological horror. It is not supernatural horror. Magic, coming off of, I think, Psycho more than Dead of Night. Magic is psychological horror, not supernatural horror. But Dead of Night, I'm not so sure. That scene where Sylvester Key walks in and the dummy invites him in and is talking to him. Michael Redgrave comes in from the bathroom and appears to be completely oblivious to what's been going on. And even asks him right after that, what did he say? What did he say? Is there a supernatural element? It plays it so smartly that it seems like it might be.
They do ask the question, how did the ventriloquist dummy get from his room to his American competitor's room? And I think they even explain, he just blanked, he took it in, put it in there himself and blanked it all out. But,
I
the
agree.
movie clearly shows Michael Redgrave getting in bed and it looks like, he's drunk and it looks like he's going to be out.
Yeah. I mean, I agree that there is an ambiguity to this particular story that isn't there in a story like Psycho. This segment in Dead of Night definitely flirts with the possibility of the supernatural in the ventriloquist dummy segment as well.
Yeah, Michael Redgrave's performance, this is like the top of everything in the film. Just watching his descent into madness, and he's just like such a handsome actor, and then to go to complete madness by the end. I mean, there's a reason why this is the last story. Magic, I brought magic, but then I also realized like after really thinking about it, the how R.L. Stine had to have been influenced by this segment and with the new Goosebumps, and Justin Long's performance, imitating that, and how the ventriloquist dummy is so similar with that evil in it and stuff. I loved it. And I love that that's the segment that ends, the anthology, because, it really ends strong.
One thing they also point out in Jonathan Rigby's English Gothic book about it is at the very end, Michael Redgrave in the bed, and again, spoilers, he talks with the dummy's voice and his lips aren't moving. So is that his profession as a ventriloquist, or is he genuinely possessed by something?
Yeah.
And one other one I will mention is there's a film called Devil Doll with an actor named Brian Halliday, and
another British film. Yeah,
it's not as good as this, but to me, that one is no doubt that there's supernatural elements in that one. And that one, to me, is even more terrifying because there's a scene where Brian Halliday is doing his act and he's got this doll named Hugo, and he tells Hugo, he says, why don't, he's talking back and forth. He says, don't you think the audience deserves some praise? And the doll says, well, yeah. And he says, well, why don't you go out there and take a bow and thank them? And the doll does. Jeez, that really bothered me when I was
I mean, I have to imagine that most, if not all, viewers feel intense pity for the character, the ventriloquist, in that segment in Dead of Night. And the same is true of the ventriloquist played by Anthony Hopkins in Magic. I mean, it's just devastating to watch the disintegration of these people. So horrifying.
And I'd like to touch on the wraparound story, the banality of it. It just plays it so straight, and there isn't that kind of boo factor to it. It's just kind of like the concept just kind of like lands on you and slowly like crushes its way into you.
Again, in Jonathan Rigby's book, they say that there's a lot of sort of expressionistic aspects of all of this stuff coming at our narrator all at the very end. And it's been a long time, but it reminded me, I think, a little bit of like in the German film The Blue Angel, when the professor goes mad and all of the, everything goes berserk. It reminded me a little bit of that.
And Christiana, in your essay, that was the first I'd heard of a Mobius strip. That's exactly what this movie is.
Yeah, it's recursive. The framers of the steady state theory of the universe, Fred Hoyle being the primary one, got the idea for that theory of how the universe exists from watching this film. The way that this looped back on itself was initially a mistake. Because when they cut the film together, they had an extra copy of the first reel, and the projectionist thought that it was the end reel of the film, and he put it on. And they were still looking for a way to end the film, and when they saw this in the screening room, they said, "Oh, that's it."
That's amazing.
Yeah, but it created some problems because it says the end before it's over.
Right. Which I feel like, again, that's kind of, that goes back to that banality where it's just like, we're just going to keep running the story while here's the credits. But do you remember this is how this all started? And you realize this is all just going to keep happening, but it's doing it while the credits are ending. And, and you're just like, what's happening? Like, there's such a weird quality about that. I feel like that's what haunts me, is the fact that they're telling me this extraordinary supernatural event while the credits are going, and they're saying nothing to see. Everybody go home now. Bye.
And the Twilight Zone, I think, borrowed the frame story from Dead of Night for another episode called Shadow Play, with somebody who is going to be executed, who claims that, all of these people around him are just participants in his dream, and that they'll cease to exist when they execute him and when he stops dreaming.
In the piece that I wrote, I brought up a question that's arisen in several discussions of the movie that I ran across, and it's been on my mind ever since I was 12 and bought the book. There's a book called Horror in the Cinema by, I think it's Ivan Butler. He has in it his theory that the brief shot of Foley answering the phone in his house is an indication to us that this is actually happening this time, because up until this time, we've been entirely in Walter Craig's head.
Yeah. And
that's a break in it where we suddenly see that there is an end to this, and it's not going to be a good one. It's another, either way, you're stuck in a nightmare. You're either stuck in a recurring nightmare, or you go with his theory and decide that, no, this is actually going to end, and it's going to end very badly this time.
Yeah, it's all been foretold.
It's a predestined. Yeah, it's like the Her story where he's seen the future. I'm not entirely convinced, just because I've seen so many movies by great directors who do reaction shots all the time that are not first person. The whole movie is not consciously first person. Nevertheless, just reading the theory back when I was 12 years old and bought the book, just reading that theory scared me. That's what the movie's about. It's not about the dream nightmare that never ends. It's about the nightmare that comes true. I kind of like the ambiguity, though, because it adds yet another loop to the whole thing.
Right.
When I'm thinking about it, I can't quite decide if that is that intentional. Did they think about that? Or
well, and I mean, what would be worse, to be in a recurring nightmare or to be in a nightmare that you're not sure if it's a nightmare or not? Where you're like, wait, I did wake up, right? This is really happening this time, right? And then you find out, nope, you still haven't woken up yet, and you get to do it again.
And no matter anyone's interpretation of the events in the film, I mean, it stirs up that existential dread for all of us.
Yeah. Katie?
I always thought that this is Walter Craig's version of hell. And it's like when we first meet him, it's like he seemed discombobulated. He's very like, I don't understand what's going on. You know, we're kind of worried about him. And then the more he starts to feel himself, the more it's like, I don't think you're actually a nice guy. And then the fact that then, you know, when he, spoiler everyone for the 80-year-old film, when he kills the professor and goes to that, and then it just like he has to relive that, that horrific thing that he did like every single day of his life now. And that's what I got from it, that, you know, you have all these people that are trying to make him feel better, that, you know, he's not crazy and everything that, you know, he's worried about, it's going to be okay. But it's like, no, actually, it's not that you're crazy. It's just that you're evil. So now you have to relive this over and over and over again. And, you know, for the rest of eternity.
One of the things that I like about the early part of the film that sort of reinforces the idea that he's in hell, when he walks into the living room where all of the other guests are seated, he refuses to shake any of their hands.
Oh, that's right.
Which is like, what? Okay, why is that? And it adds a nice sense of the uncanny and to the situation. I like it a lot.
In that house, of the guests and the narrator, the architect who's gone there, the only person who dies is the professor, the psychiatrist. He's the one with the rational idea. No, that didn't happen. This is all in your mind. Of course, you were this is transference. This is sort of thing. To me, it occurs to me that maybe the idea is the supernatural is it's still he did this the first time, and that's out of character to kill someone. You know, later on you could say, I want to end this nightmare. Maybe I can end it this way. But the first time, it seems still out of character to him. It's almost to me, I'm wondering if it's like the supernatural was saying, no, we are real.
Yeah.
And you are our enemy by trying to explain us away. Therefore, we are going to eliminate you.
By possessing Walter Craig and making him murder Von Stratton.
One interesting thing that's going on in the opening scene as well that I have not seen anybody mention anywhere. So this is just me, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong about this. Walter Craig enters the house, is hanging up his hat and everything. And then the music introduces a new element. And I think it's a new element to the horror film because I haven't found any mention of it existing in a horror film before this. I think there's a theremin in the score in the background. So when you watch it next time, take a listen for that, because I think there's it's more subtle than you get in say, you know, Spellbound and coming right after it. But you know, before the theremin really takes off in the early 50s with They There Stood Still, and it came from outer space and all them.
I'm getting this from your article, Christian, but like the music changes. You know, the first time we see, you know, Walter Craig show up at the house, it's a different musical cue than the second time we see him. You just kind of wonder like how that spiral will continue.
This film is a great example of the Kuleshov effect. There was a Soviet filmmaker named Kuleshov who postulated that a performance is shaped by what's around it. And he demonstrated this by having an identical shot of a man looking on, sort of blank-faced, and then cutting it to a bowl of food, a coffin, and a child. And with each juxtaposition of images, it changes how you view what that performance is. And this film does that. Because at the outset, you don't have the creepy music, but at the end of the film, after you've seen all of this, it changes and it gives you that music, and suddenly the meaning of those shots absolutely completely changes in your perception, even though they're identical.
It's a wonderful little magic trick in a movie full of magic tricks.
Oh yeah.
Final thoughts on Dead of Night.
It's a 1945 movie coming out right after World War II, and there's not a mention of World War II in it. And it's a film that's filled with trauma, and it's a film that's filled with doom and inescapable fate. I've been thinking about it since writing the piece, that it's really has the engine of film noir, although it just doesn't have the body of the car. It doesn't have the structure of it. You know, a lot of things are different than you get in your standard film noir. But boy, the heart of it, when you get down to the themes that are going on here, that you can't escape fate, it's early film noir.
Yeah, I agree with Lee that I guess you could consider this sort of the downward spiral of film noir, where you're trapped in a nightmare world that you don't understand. Very Cornell Woolrich sort of film. I think it's interesting that this film does not have any immediate successors, because it's another 10 years before there's really another significant British horror film. I mean, you could probably consider, I don't know, The Queen of Spades maybe as a successor, but it's not like this film. This film is absolutely a supernatural horror film. The other thing that I think of about this film and about the way that this works in the broader stream of Ealing Studios is that Michael Balcon is the British equivalent of Val Lewton. Yeah, you have these 4 directors, but they're all working in concert and to the tastes of the producer and owner of the studio. And Balcon is one of the major figures in British film in the early part of the century. Also, the grandfather of Daniel Day-Lewis.
Did not know that. Alan.
Again, I keep going back to Jonathan Rigby's English Gothic book, which is a good resource on this. But he mentions that, I agree. It's kind of an interesting little bubble that pops up. In like 1943 and 1944, there were a couple British movies that dealt with there was a movie called The Halfway House and a movie called A Place of One's Own that deal with ghosts, so that's present. And after this one, there was a film called The Latin Quarter, another that had fantastic elements like this. But at the time, I don't know how successful this movie was, or I don't know if it found its true audience. And like I said, it took not until we're getting into the Hammer era and stuff that you start seeing a reoccurrence of British emphasis on fantasy films like this, or horror films.
Worldwide gross, according to IMDb, was $35,275. Now, I don't know what the equivalent of that is, because I think it was like a quarter to go to the movies in 1945. Mm-hmm. So I think that's pretty good at the time, maybe. Yeah. That's solid. As I said when the first time I saw it, how I feel like knowing this movie exists and how it just has influenced so many other films that I love and TV shows that I love, and it still does. I mean, you cannot deny that this was a major influence in these films. And I think that's amazing that even 80 years later, it's solid. It stands up, and that's really hard to do. I love it, and I always tell people to check it out.
And John.
Well, it was really lovely to chat with you all about Dead of Night. I mean, I do really love this film. Something extra that I could add as a recommendation for an anthology that I think is very much underrated, and that's certainly underseen. It's called After Midnight. It's from 1989. That one has a frame story that is a fantastic homage to the frame story of Dead of Night. So if you haven't seen Dead of Night, watch that first, and then watch After Midnight.
We can always count on you, John, to bring the obscure titles to bear. And speaking of obscure titles, I feel like this one kind of does fall into that realm of films that we take for granted, that we know are historically important and significant, and that we just don't watch that often. So I was really thankful for the opportunity to revisit it and to know that I had this wonderful sage group of folks to commune to about it. And thank you all for coming on tonight, and looking forward to having you all on again very soon. And until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.